I didn't even want a cell phone. My wife Leah got it for me when she renewed her plan. I would have left it on the kitchen table and never charged it if she didn't insist I carry it with me. What's the point of having a phone at home if you're going to make calls from the car? I argued unsuccessfully. She occasionally called in other guise of making sure I hadn't forgotten to do this or go there, but we both know it was really just to make sure I had the phone and to prove it useful. Even so, I still insisted I didn't need it, so I never gave the number out or used it to call anyone but her. That's what made it so infuriating when people started calling. The call wasn't Leah's office number or cell, and the prefix told me the call was from Danville, about an hour and a half from where we lived. I wasn't going to answer, but I figured something might have happened and Leah had someone calling me for her. The caller was a woman who asked for someone I didn't know and whose name I didn't bother to pay attention to since it wasn't mine. "Wrong number," I said. "Oh, sorry," she said, and we hung up. The next time, it was a male voice on the other end. I laughed when I started getting calls from the Danville jail, always hanging up without incurring the cost of the call. Most times, I didn't answer, and since I didn't have a greeting, sometimes people would leave a message. That's when I realized I had been given someone else's life. Through these errant calls and voicemails, I had access to all the previous holder of this phone number's friends and their desire, and his, for their friendship. "Call me," a woman said sensually. "Come pick me up," a broken-down friend pleaded from the side of the road. There were invitations to parties, requests for a ride to the store, and someone called seeking a shoulder to cry on. They all left messages, and I listened to all of them, with a shameful voyeur's interest and a chuckle, always thinking, ain't happening. It wasn't long before these calls fell away. And that's when she called. The first few calls I didn't pick up, and the caller didn't leave a message, but the calls kept coming, and she started leaving messages. "Are you there, Sean? Why won't you pick up, baby? I wish you would pick up." It got to the place where I started recognizing the number. There was a pleading placidness in her voice, and she sounded like an older woman, maybe even elderly. And the fact that she was elderly was the only reason I didn't just delete her messages and forget about it. My mother had just died a couple years earlier, and I felt sympathy for this woman in a way that I probably wouldn't have felt for anyone before. I decided this was something I had to deal with, and finally I answered with the intention of telling her that she had the wrong number. And that's just what I told her. The first time, the second time, third time, the fourth. When it started, she would apologize and get off the phone, but later, there would be no response. No request to talk to anyone, no voice at all. She would just sit there. Occasionally, there would be the sound of a television in the background, but most of the time, it would just be silence. And she never hung up. That would always be left to me after several unresponded hellos. Just to make conversation, I finally told Leah about it over dinner. "How sad," she said. "Not at all," I said. "That's what happens when fat fingers meet bad eyesight." "Maybe there's more to it than that," she said. "Maybe she's an older woman who doesn't have any friends and is reaching out to someone, trying to find someone who cares or someone she cares about." And that's what happens when you marry the soft-hearted, I thought. For another year, the calls kept coming, more sporadically, once or twice a month. There was no reason for me to keep answering. She seldom spoke, and when she did, she asked for Sean. And I wasn't Sean, and I couldn't help her find him. I wanted to ignore these calls, but Leah had shamed me enough to the point that I just kept answering. "May I ask your name?" I finally asked one evening into the sound of a news broadcast that served as background for the silence. "I want to talk to Sean," she asked. "May I ask your name?" I was trying hard not to sound perturbed. "Sherry," she said hesitantly. With that out of the way, her voice was stronger as she said, "I just want to talk to Sean." "Sherry," I said, "I've told you before this isn't Sean's phone. You've got the wrong number." She continued to sit there in silence, like she was waiting for me to burst out in laughter and say, "Hold on, he's right here," and then hand the phone over to Sean, but that wasn't going to happen. So after a few more seconds of listening to the background of news, I hung up. I wrote her name down. I wanted to tell my wife I had gotten more information about the lost caller, as Leah dubbed it. I forgot to tell Leah over dinner, and I didn't give the scrap of paper I'd written with the name on it a second thought. It didn't matter. It wasn't long after the call stopped. It had been a couple of months before I even realized it. Actually, I didn't think about it again until one Friday night when my wife asked if I had heard from the lost caller lately and fretted about her. It was only then that I remembered a piece of paper and got out of bed. It was only then that I remembered the piece of paper and got out of bed and went to go search for it. I dug it out from the middle of the stack of papers on the end of the dining room table and brought it back to Leah, who set it on the nightstand on her side of the bed. One morning, I found her at the computer in the guest bedroom when I got up to take my first pee of the day. I found her, she said, her glaze locked on the computer. What I had to do couldn't wait, but she was still reading when I got back. Found who? I asked. She was always talking about something and then acting like she'd already told me, but I hadn't listened. I listened. I'm sure she wasn't telling me all the stuff she claimed she was. Sherry Kearney, she said. I found her. It's her obituary. She died about a month ago. I stood over her shoulder and read. How she lived and where wasn't immediately mentioned, but it did say she was 55 years old, from Danville, and a secretary. That was as far as I got when Lee noted, I found Sean too. She clicked the mouse and another window came up as she said, he's dead too. He was 21 years old and had died in a car wreck 2 years ago. It was a single car accident. He was speeding and hit a tree, just being reckless and irresponsible. Then again, that's what young people are. Of course, I can't say for absolutely sure, but I'm pretty sure this is them. Right names, mother and son from the right area. Lee looked up at me. There was nothing more to say. If this was her, and this was them, maybe she died of a broken heart. No parent wants to bury a child, and no parent really ever accepts it. And you don't have to have children to know that. Maybe now they're reunited. Maybe before she died, she found acceptance. Maybe now she found peace. Why had she decided that this was the phone number of her son? Maybe it had been his. Maybe she had called this number hoping, wishing, it would be his voice to answer one day. Hey Mama, I imagine she dreamed of hearing. I'm on my way, and I'll be home soon. I cannot suppose what she was willing to give for the last 2 years to hear the voice she wanted on the other end, the rest of her life. Die happy that moment? But of course, that hadn't happened. She had gotten me, a stranger, and yet she kept calling. I don't know if I had done a service or a disservice each time I answered. Before I would answer, maybe she was enjoying a futile moment of optimism that this time she would hear the right voice. Or maybe I was making her mom arose when the call was picked up and she heard my voice. The wrong voice. The voice that confirmed to her that he was never going to answer again. I guess it doesn't matter now. It bothered me that my wife was right and had been so comforting. Even if I knew there hadn't been anything I could have done. I decided to go for a walk.